work with other members of the House on that committee as well. What VACO asked me to come and talk to you a little bit about, and we want to hopefully save time for questions, is what the Select Committee on School Safety is accomplishing and what we're doing. And in fact, we will be meeting to finalize recommendations later this week on Wednesday in Harrisonburg. And what I wanted to do is give you a little bit of background on what that Select Committee, why it was formed, what some of the initial recommendations that I see coming out of the Select Committee I hope we're going to be. And then I'm going to sit down and listen to Chairman Bulova. First of all, the Speaker of the House, Kirk Cox, during the regular session and lots of discussion, members on both sides of the aisle thought that with the advent, unfortunately, of situations where we've had school violence, especially young people acting out violently, whether it's shootings or other cases of bullying and the like, felt like it would be important for us to concentrate on school safety in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The House of Delegates has not had a select committee in 150 years, and select committees were originally determined to concentrate on specific topics and to concentrate and make recommendations related to those specific topic areas, and that's why the Select Committee was formed. I think it also emphasizes the importance the House of Delegates is putting on these recommendations and how we're going to work with our counterparts, not only in the House, but more importantly with our friends in the Senate as well. There are 24 priority recommendations that have that the Speaker announced just recently as of last week, ahead of the Select Committee's meeting that we're going to have this coming week or this week. And from my perspective, I think the recommendations that are going to be most important deal with student behavior and intervention. The subcommittee I actually chaired. We also had one subcommittee dealing with infrastructure, then also looking at protocols and how local governments can work with local law enforcement and the like. And I know Chairman Bulova is going to talk more about some great examples of Fairfax County and what they've already been doing. But to me, the most important thing we can do with recommendations is to find the root causes of why young people are acting out violently against themselves, in the case of suicide, or others, and to look at the issues surrounding bullying, which the General Assembly has started to deal with in the last 4 years, but obviously there's more that we can do. So there are going to be 24, I think, priority recommendations the Speaker laid out, and of those 24, I think we have over 60 proposals and draft recommendations that you will see. Now, a lot of people are saying, why did you put that many recommendations out? Well, one, we know we have to prioritize, and that's what the Select Committee is going to try to do, but what we want to do is lay out all the work of the 3 subcommittees related to recommendations, and if we can't accomplish all of them this session, we do think this is going to be a blueprint moving forward so that we can come back the next year, the year after that, and slowly but surely, hopefully get to all 60 in the next 3 to 4 years. And I think that's a good way to deal with it. Each of the subcommittees had 2 or 3 meetings. In the case of the subcommittee I had the honor of chairing, we had 3 meetings, including talking to students about what they felt were the main concerns, and school counselors and those that are dealing with mental health issues for students. The other 2 subcommittees had public hearings and did those around the state in different areas. The Select Committee has had 3, now we'll be going on 4 meetings. So we also had a website where we took input and received recommendations as well. Now, real quickly, let me talk about the priority recommendations that I see coming forward. First and foremost, from the standpoint of our subcommittee, we do believe that we need to realign the responsibilities related to school counselors. As most of you know that know anything about our school counselors, they now are test administrators and do lots of other things administratively, but they don't have as much time to actually counsel students and provide them not only in-school assistance, but more importantly, then to refer them and their families to mental health professionals and other services outside of the school as well. So one of the things you're going to see us address is try to figure out a way to come up with funds for localities and our school systems to move the administrative functions to other individuals within the school system and have the school counselors deal with and spend 80% of their time on dealing with school behavior issues and emotional problems. Another recommendation is that we're going to be looking at is to create a statewide tip line application for mental health and suicide prevention. We think that is something that can help every school system in the Commonwealth, and also provide through mental health services real-time crisis intervention counseling. Now we're going to have to partner, and you all know the Commonwealth has community services boards that provide in-community services, so we want to make sure we're working on that partnership as well. We also are going to have some priority recommendations, including funding for the Center for School and Campus Safety, new school resource officer positions, which many school systems have asked us for. In addition to that, to look for ways to better utilize school security officers for those schools that have them, and provide additional school security grants to accomplish that. We're also going to look at targeting investments that will help provide educators with knowledge that they need to make sure students are protected by qualified law enforcement professionals, and to make sure our schools are safe and secure. We're looking at additional training for both staff and educators, but we're going to try to be careful with that, because every time we mandate training, sometimes it's difficult for the local school systems to accomplish that, but our goal is going to be to move in the direction of doing that statewide. And I know VACO has as one of their recommendations or legislative priorities, looking at school safety surveys and the like, and more importantly, to have policies that would apply across the state. We're going to have to come up with funding for that as well. We also are going to look for, and this is what deals with the important role that localities play, both school systems and our local governments, and that is for best practices for localities for mutual aid agreements. There has got to be communication between local law enforcement, the school system, and our public safety officials at the local level. And many localities are already doing great work, including Fairfax and others. But we need to make sure every school system, whether they're in rural Virginia or urban, suburban Virginia, have model mutual aid agreements and have those partnerships and protocols for school safety. And we're going to need your all's help to do that, but we're not going to try to, again, figure out a way one size fits all and say that the way one part of the state does it is the way another part of the state does it, but we also need to make sure that there are those MOUs and that those things are out there. Another key recommendation includes creation of the Student Mental Health Commission that we're looking at. One of the things that we have found is related to behavioral health. There are many, many concerns related to student issues that they're facing related to bullying, suicide, and the like. And we think a commission needs to look at just that longer term, not only at the recommendations that we're looking at, but also other areas that may be helpful. Let me just end by saying, before I turn it over to Chairman Bulova, we are far and ahead of other states when it comes to school safety. The one thing we learned is that we do, and our localities already do, a great deal to keep our students safe. And schools are literally the safest place if you compare other areas than other places where young people are. But we know we can do more. One of the things we're going to look at is the infrastructure and provide additional funding so that you can secure your schools from a building standpoint, look at best practices there, so there are other areas we're looking at that. But the Department of Criminal Justice Services and Training already has a school resource safety resources out there for school resource officers and the like. We're looking at providing additional positions for that agency and making sure that those resources are there for all these recommendations and moving forward. And as I said, we hope to get a start this session, and I think you'll see significant work in this area. but it all takes money, it all takes legislation, and I've learned one thing in my 23 years in the General Assembly: you can't assume any piece of legislation is going to pass or any budget amendment will pass. The administration, McAuliffe administration was very good, and before it left and looking at some of these issues, the Northam administration is working with us on this as well. So we look forward to partnering in a bipartisan manner for these issues, and look forward to your questions.
So it's great to be here with you today, and when I was asked if I would participate in a panel discussion regarding school safety, I immediately said yes, because I have a story to tell. In Fairfax County, we've been working very closely with our school board on the issue of behavioral health issues within the school, and also on the issue of equity. Are all kids throughout the Fairfax County community and school system having access to the same opportunities so that everyone has the opportunity to succeed? And so we created a committee between our two boards. So it's 2 members of the school board, 2 members of the Board of Supervisors, and the name of the organization. The initials are skipped, and I always forget what that stands for. That's why I grabbed for my paper, but skipped stands for, where is it? Successful Children and Youth Policy Team. That's easy to remember, right? Successful Children and Youth Policy Team, or SCIPT. And the purpose originally was to look at equity issues, to look at behavioral health issues, and we were especially drilling down on pre-K, early childhood education, and looking for ways to, help make that opportunity available for all kids. As part of that, we adopted something called, our 2 boards adopted a policy resolution called One Fairfax. And One Fairfax is an organization meant to look at our programs within the school system in the county, right down to transportation issues, land use issues, through the eyes of equity, making sure that opportunity is available. As part of drilling down and looking at young people's issues, the subject of safety within our schools, has become a more pressing and a scarier issue that all of us are dealing with throughout our nation, and so our school superintendent and the chief of police in Fairfax County were beginning to make changes and amendments to a memorandum of understanding regarding our school resource officer program, which I thought would be kind of a no-brainer. People are concerned about the safety of children within the schools, and having a police officer within our school system, within our middle schools and our high schools, should help to make people feel more comfortable that there is a professional who is there. We've had school resource officers for many, many years, and they're especially trained specifically for the purpose of dealing, with young people within the school system. Then I started hearing from individuals from the community, such as the NAACP and the ACLU, who wanted to have a say in what we were doing, in what this memorandum of understanding would be and how it would be changed. What is it now? And they had doubts as to what actually is the relationship between police officers and students and administrators within our school. And so I did what I usually do, and that is to reach out and invite members of the community who felt that they, had an interest and had a concern to the table. And so I created a group, and there's a handout that should be on people's, people's chairs. And I'm going to read the description of the scope of what was the SRO Community Review Committee. So the scope of that was Fairfax County is currently updating our current MOU between Fairfax County Police Department and the Fairfax County Public Schools. This MOU defines the assignment and roles of school resource officers who serve in our high school and middle schools. To embrace or enhance the process for updating the MOU, this committee will review the current MOU, consider proposed staff changes, because staff is already in the process of making some changes, and provide perspective and feedback to be used for a final draft of the MOU that will ultimately be presented to both the school board and the Board of Supervisors for approval. And I asked for Shirley Ginwright, who was chair of which you've just heard, the Fairfax County Community of Trust. So I thought that should be a good chairperson to help people feel comfortable with what we were doing. And you can also see some of the individuals who were invited to come to the table. So these were folks who had been asked to participate. And so the PTAs, NAACP, an organization called NACASAC, National Korean American Services and Education Consortium, an Hispanic group, the Police Civilian Review Panel, Chinese American Alliance, ACLU. When people started hearing that we were creating this committee, then people started to self-nominate. And so the committee grew from what was relatively small to much larger. We had our first meeting, and you have a copy of the syllabus and also the agenda for the first meeting. This is like the way that I like to operate, bringing people to the table and inviting folks to have a role in and participate in making decisions. This was the messiest, angriest, most violent group that I've ever pulled together. And so people came, the very folks who I had invited to the table to help, turned out to be working behind the scenes to try to change the agenda or to I guess do negative things to this process. They came to the table with feeling that way because they were sure that they were maybe not going to be heard. And this is what their concern was. So in my view, the school resource officer program was, something there to keep our kids safe. And, most people I talk with are, very pleased that we have that program and want more. Even talk about, well, what about the elementary schools? But some of the folks who were at the table with us were concerned about having a uniformed, armed police officer in the schools, and for kids who do things that kids sometimes do. Kids do not have the judgment of adults, ending up with a police record just because a police officer is there within the school system, and could wind up arresting a young person for something that otherwise would have been something that was handled by school administration. And so that was really the crux of what we were dealing with. How do we find that middle ground between keeping schools safe? School resource officers are there as mentors. They're there as eyes and ears so that when a student is in trouble, they feel comfortable coming to a school resource officer. They shouldn't be afraid. They shouldn't be afraid that that officer is going to turn them in or turn in their family or do something that is going to create a legal problem for the students. And so finding that middle ground or finding that balance between keeping students safe, keeping the school and teachers and administrators safe, while also making sure that we were not criminalizing behavior that is mainly immature for young people. We wound up having more meetings than we thought we would. We wound up sort of tossing out our entire memorandum of understanding. The state has actually an excellent boilerplate or model memorandum of understanding that we borrowed and used and modified using some of the input that we got from the group that started out being angry, and eventually this committee ended with people feeling extremely satisfied that what they were concerned about was reflected in the changed memorandum of understanding. I have some copies of, just a few copies of the memorandum of understanding that we eventually adopted. And if anyone would like to have a copy, but I just have about 5, I can make some additional copies. If you'd like to have some, or just contact me, and I'm happy to make sure that you have everything that you would like to have. But again, it was a really interesting experience. And it was illuminating to me to realize something that looked pretty simple, school safety, and you hear of people saying, well, arm the teachers, give teachers weapons, and in this case, it was even, people were concerned about professional police officers within the school system and some of the things that they feared could be of concern. So I'm going to stop talking. I know that we've got some questions, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to participate in this particular panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate Landis and Chairman Bulova. That was wonderful. I do have, my first question is for Chairman Landis. There's been a great deal of research on the importance of nurturing environments in early childhood for children's future success, including their ability to self-regulate and manage their emotions. You've served on the joint subcommittee on the Virginia Preschool Initiative. How do you think that Virginia is doing this in this arena?
Well, we, I think, are making improvements with early childhood. Part of the issue we're struggling with is, as you all know, traditionally and constitutionally, education is defined as K through 12. So to do pre-K through 12, we have really looked at kind of our hybrid model. As you know, we also have state funds for early childhood education and pre-K programs, especially for at-risk young people. And we also have private providers. So we've worked to try to provide, if you will, kind of upgrading the privates and continue to support the public providers. The First Lady is very interested, and I think you'll see this session looking for ways to try to build on that partnership and increase. And self-regulation and dealing with emotional issues with young people is very important, and that's one of the things we're starting to actually measure in the state, so we can see how well kids are doing in our pre-K programs, not only academically but emotionally, and also having teachers that are prepared to know how to teach little ones on how to work with others, how when someone tells you no, not just to get upset. And anybody that's had any child knows that little ones get upset when you take toys away from them or when they don't want to share. So we're trying to make sure that all that is included in what we expect of our pre-K programs and to build upon, again, that partnership of the public and the private.
Thank you, Delegate Landis. A question for Chairman Bulova would be, teachers and school administrators are taking on roles that go beyond academic instruction in ensuring that schools are supportive environments. And you kind of addressed this a little bit in your comments. Do you think teacher-principal training adequately prepares them for what is expected from them? And did you learn anything about that in all of your workings when you came to the conclusion with your MOU?
So it's not easy to be a child these days, to be a kid these days. And you know, there are pressures that kids have that we did not have when we were children. And fear.
Oh, you want to?
So it's not easy to be a kid these days, and you know, young people today have pressures and fears and concerns that we probably, you know, did not have when we were growing up. So making sure that, you know, we are really working. I'm not on the school board, never have been on the school board, but I sure have learned how important it is to establish the kind of close working relationship with the school board. That relationship is really critical. I think many of in Fairfax County, more than 50% of our budget goes to our school system. About 53% of our budget goes to the school system. It is our #1 priority. And making sure that our teachers have the kind of training that they need in order to address the, you know, more complicated, difficult behavioral issues that our young people are experiencing is important. Often it does come down to making sure that we're sufficiently funding teacher recruitment, teacher training, and that we are listening to the needs of our school board when they present their budget, but that we're both having a discussion, you know, regarding behavioral issues. Sometimes it's not something that is addressed actually, you know, by the school system. It may be in partnership with nonprofit organizations. And in Fairfax County, we've established organizations such as community schools, where the private sector is partnering with our school system, partnering with the county in order to bring resources from the community into the schools, so that we're best able to, you know, provide, you know, the kind of supports and the kind of community, you know, involvement and engagement, especially in some of our schools where there may not be as strong a parental role. We've got, you know, 28% of the children within our school system are eligible for free and reduced lunch. That means we have pockets of poverty within our school system. Often it is, you know, immigrant families who are struggling just to keep a roof over their head and food on the table, and having involvement from the community and supports from the community to assist with that, I think, is especially critical. So really, it's a partnership that is required in order to make sure that, you know, all of those things can happen successfully.
Wonderful, thank you for those comments. I'm just going to share very quickly with you what we did in Stafford County, and then we'll open it up to discussion. So it was after the Parkland shooting that in February of this year, we came up with a school security task force. And they actually came back with 14 recommendations in September of this year. And I'm not going to go into all the details, of that. But I do want to share the most significant thing that came out at the very beginning. And one of my colleagues, Jack Cavalier, is here, and he's going to share with you a little bit later about some legislation that we're putting forward in the General Assembly, and a little bit about what we're hearing about that. But the number one thing that came out when we have a public safety meeting in Stafford County once a month, and we invited the school security risk management employee to those meetings. And it became very evident at the very beginning that on the school side, they were really focused more on the workman's comp insurance claims rather than school security. So even though the school board and the Board of Supervisors over the years had funded a lot of different things to improve security, the front vestibule so that the parents go in through an area and they're screened with their identification cards, and fixing the locks on the classroom doors, just making sure those are operational. We found out that we really didn't have anybody dedicated to that. And that is not the number one recommendation that came out of the study. So I'm more than happy to share with you a little bit more of information about Stafford, but I thought at this point in time it would be best to open it up to questions so that you can address Delegate Landis and Chairman Bulova. Yes?
Delegate Landis, I see in one of the recommendations was for push technology for threat assessment. It's at the bottom of page 2. I know in the past they've offered grants for security cameras. Would you guys consider maybe offering a grant for that instead of pushing that down to the local governments?
I think with all of our recommendations, you're going to see what we're going to try to do is a pot of money to provide some flexibility for the local schools and the local governments, because some of you all are farther along than others in some of the technology or what you've done. For instance, some schools still just need to outfit their school vestibules and make sure that they're secure. So maybe that's a priority. Maybe you want to use the technology that I mentioned or some of the things that you just mentioned. And so what we're trying to do is come up with how much do these things cost on average, and then try to see how could we come up with grants similar to what we did with SROs. In other words, you would apply, we would have dollars there, and then you determine how many you want to have based on the money, and maybe how much local investments you want to make as well. So that's the intent of what we want to try to do, because as I mentioned, and I really do believe this, one size just doesn't fit all. Every locality, we've got 133 school systems, 134 school systems in the state. They're each and every one's unique and different. Some as large as Fairfax County and some as small as Highland County. So that's why the flexibility, I think, would go a long way. For instance, Highland County only has one school, so to secure that school, it's not going to take a large infusion of cash to do that. But Fairfax County, on the other hand, anytime you put something in place for the schools, you've got to multiply that by the number of schools. So that's what we're going to try to do.
So, Chairman Landis, I understand and respect the statement that the schools are still the safest place for kids. And if you look, obviously, at the number of schools that we have, public schools, that number may prove out. But there's not that many spaces where children, little children gather today that are as unsafe as a school. And so, as a county official, I would want to talk to parents about things like mental health, things like bullying awareness, what we're doing in our schools. But I would no longer be comfortable saying to a parent, your child's in the safest space in their school. I would more talk about how to make the safe spacer, the space.
It's safer.
All that. And have those discussions and talk about prevention and mental health and all those things. It doesn't seem like a genuine statement anymore, unfortunately. It doesn't.
Well, and Chairman Bulova alluded to it from the standpoint of kids face many, many challenges. Part of the problem is we have a lot of single-parent households. from the standpoint that just provides challenges, because if mom or dad is working and they don't see some of the things going on with the young person because they're working. Many families, single parent families, the parent is working a couple jobs in the economy. Hopefully that'll change in the future. But so we understand that that is the case. Statistically, though, schools are still safe in Virginia. In fact, when you compare us to other states, we've done a lot of things that we need to be proud of, and that you all need to be proud of, in assuring parents that we're better off than many other states because of the things that we've done in the past. During the McDonald administration, that's when we really started this trend of really working with localities to secure schools and to make them safer, and to try to address some of those things. So that's when we really looked at beefing up the school resource officer grant program, the memorandums of understanding, the models out there. And so there's more that we can do. But that's why, as you heard me also say, the one piece that we haven't done the job that I think we need to do is the behavioral health area, the intervention area. And that's why the first step is to get those professionals in the school actually providing the counseling services that they should be doing, and not administering tests or other administrative functions. Then we also want to look at what the CSBs can do to partner with our local school systems, and that's what I'm really emphasizing in the recommendations. And those are the people, I think, the professionals that can help work with the parents on the bullying issues and provide that staff support and the like. So that's why I'm trying to emphasize that. And I think, and in fact, actually, when the speaker noted kind of those 24 priorities, those were at the top of the list, because that's what we've heard. And the legislators, both Republicans and Democrats, believe if we can get to those problems, we stave off young people acting out against themselves or others. So, prevention. Yeah, it does. So.
Gentleman back here.
Thank you. A question to Belly again. And I'm sorry, Sharon. Sharon, if I asked the question to Sharon, she'd say, "Why did you do this to me?" I don't see you as on. So, and I should have asked Senator Hanger when he was here, because it might be a Senate finance question, not a House education question. But
well, I'm on a House appropriations.
Oh, that's a House appropriations question. Oh, there you go. Here's the issue. Prince William County has taken almost an all of the above approach on school safety. We have, in the last couple of years, hired dramatic increase in the number of social workers in our schools, mental health workers in our schools. We've had school resource officers in all 12 of our high schools, all 18 of our middle schools for many years. It's been a very successful program. Parents, I don't think, would be happy without the school resource officers. This year, we started a new pilot program. I think we have funding for 10 elementary schools, although we've only actually hired 5 people under the new rule that allows school systems to hire retired law enforcement officers to provide elementary school security. The challenge we're having is this. Prince William County police officers join in their early 20s. It's a retirement issue, isn't it? Retirement issue. They join in their early 20s. They serve 25 years. They're now my age. They don't want to sit in a rocking chair. They want a full-time job. We can't hire so we're hiring Fairfax County police officers and FBI agents to patrol our schools, because our own officers don't want to work 32 hours a week. They want a full-time job, but they can't double dip. Do you see, as an appropriator, do you see a pathway for the state to allow, under these circumstances, a double dipping with a VRS and a full-time employee?
I think you're going to see a piece of legislation come forward to address that issue, because that's something that was brought to our attention through the select committee as well. So we're trying to figure out how we can deal with that, especially with those that are retired law enforcement, either state or local, that are in the VRS, and to make sure that they can continue to receive their VRS, and then also provide security in elementary schools or other schools where maybe there aren't enough school resource officers, or from a funding standpoint, it's just not possible. So I think you'll see that. In fact, Scott Lingfelter used to serve on the Education Committee, passed that legislation.
He's going to ask me to ask.
Yeah. So we are going to try to address that. The problem is going to be, we've never allowed through VRS someone who's been retired to come back and work full-time. So I'm not sure we'll be able to work full-time, but we may be able to get you close at 30, 35 hours a week or something. And actually, during the school day, if you can have those folks there during the regular school day, the majority of the time, that would go a long way. So I think we're going to see legislation to address that. Again, we'll know more this coming Wednesday related to the specific legislation.
All right, going back to the guidance counseling thing, you talked about how they're being pulled. Ours gets pulled being administrators sometimes to deal with issues. And one of our administrators being pulled from a building for a school board meeting. Going to the SOQs. SOQs say that we have one guidance counselor in the middle school, and I believe the number is 300. How well can they get to know a child if they're having to deal with 300? I mean, you divide it up, take 10 minutes a day. It's going to take them a month to see every child, and they're going to see each child 6 times. So it needs to be done to decrease those numbers to add more guidance counselors. So that is one of the issues that I see.
One of the things that school counselors pointed out that they would like us to have a standard of 250 students per counselor. I think that's a laudable goal. We're looking at, and again, Wednesday we're going to see what that cost would be across the state and to see if that's something we look at. I do believe if we look at the number of hours first, that's going to be the most important thing to make sure we adjust, and then look at the ratio. But that is something that's part of our recommendations, as part of the 60 recommendations that we have. But again, what we're going to try to find is what the costs are and what we can get for our biggest bang for our buck quickly, and then again try to start building on those other recommendations as well. So there's not going to be simple answers for any of these things, and these things that, as you all know, you all deal with local budgets. You have to prioritize, and that's what we're going to have to try to do. But that's where you all can be very helpful working with your school board and say, this is a higher priority than this, related to the grant programs. Once you see the recommendations, and hopefully VACO will get out all of our recommendations and all the budget-related information on how much it will cost and the like, because this is going to be competing with everything else that the localities and the state's looking for from the standpoint of funding.
Yes, so going back to the guidance counselor issue, because it's different K-6 or K-8 in high school, because they are the college piece there.
Right.
So I wondered if any thought had been given to maybe bringing in mental health professionals to the high school piece. So that's my question for you, and then for the chair, I wondered if you could talk a little bit, because our MOU, I'll be frank, we just signed it. Did you get any pushback from your police chief and your county administrator because you were trying something different? So those are my questions.
The issue related to guidance counselors, what we're looking at is again to see what we can also do through CSBs from the standpoint of or mental health professionals coming into the schools, either funded through the school system or partnering with the CSBs. Again, for some school systems, it will be easier to do than others. We have a number of CSBs, and some are better off than others. We're also, one of the reasons we want to continue through that commission is to probably look at coordinating more with what Senator Deeds is doing with the joint subcommittee dealing with behavioral health and mental health in the future. So we're going to have to make sure those two kind of blend together, because just because a student is in a school and has a behavioral health or intervention need, if it's a mental health issue, it's also a community health issue or mental health issue. So we're looking for those partnerships. We are looking at what it would cost to fund those positions. That's going to be part of kind of the budget related thing. But I believe that we need to have more of those in schools. But again, as you all know, and if you were in here for the budget related thing, we're already behind the 8 ball from the standpoint of where we should be with public K through 12 funding. Anytime we add something, it adds to that base budget. So that's why, again, that's where it's helpful for you all to tell us, even from a K through 12 system, are these positions more important, or those positions more important? And again, what my goal, and I think a lot of us, is to try to say these are best practices, but also with K through 12 funding, also let you all have some flexibility working with your school system. Again, where you've already got mental health professionals, the school system to do in their school system, that's great. We're the ones that don't. And again, if we designate too specifically positions sometimes, and we don't have enough money, then nobody gets them. And that's a problem too. So that's an SOQ issue that we struggle with. And I'm going to let the chairman answer.
So the short answer is no, that we did not get pushback. And mainly, sort of the stars had aligned where both our police chief, Ed Rossler, and the new superintendent of schools, Scott Braybrand, they both were in agreement that they were willing to listen to the community on making some changes. I think that, I know that our police chief was probably surprised, that there was so much urgency within the community to want to have a seat at the table to really have a role in what some of those changes might be. So already the police chief was making changes, working with the superintendent of schools. And so already there were some staff changes that they were feeling, pretty good about. The community were not really sure that those changes and those amendments would go as far as they wanted in order to provide the clarity and the assurances about what was an administrative role and what was a public safety role. That really was the real concern. Kids don't have the judgment. High school kids, middle school kids don't have the judgment of an adult. And what they were concerned about is, and also racially and culturally, kids who are new to this country or who felt that maybe they would be viewed through a racial prism unfairly. And that was the community's concern, or that segment of the community. Also at the table were people whose children had developmental disabilities, children with autism, who react differently, to being touched or to being approached by law enforcement or anyone. And so there was no pushback. There already was an eagerness to make some changes. Some changes were already in the process of being made, and as a result of hearing from the community on some of those additional concerns, even more of a change was made as a result of that. And in the end, there was a great deal of satisfaction with where things had landed.
This gentleman right here.
Melanie Landis, I'll let you I appreciate the committee's recommendations that you talked about. I spent 15 years as a school resource officer. My wife's a middle school principal.
And you ran for local office?
I appreciate what you said, that it's not a cookie cutter approach and it doesn't apply to all of Virginia. And to piggyback off the gentleman from Prince William, we kind of have sort of the same problem in Wythe County. We put SROs in our elementary schools. We have 3 centrally located high schools. Our middle schools, or elementary schools rather, are on the outskirts of the county. We have one that's within sight distance of Interstate 77, probably a 15-minute response time from the county seat. It's the definition of what you would call soft target. The problem we have ran into is we're going to 32 hours a week, but for example, at that elementary school, we had a gentleman that retired 10 years ago as a master trooper of the Virginia State Police. He was actually one of the first troopers that was certified in the DARE program, if you remember when the state police was over there. Well-trained, well-educated. He retired, worked in the private sector for 10 years.
now, DCJS is saying because he's been out so long, in order to be an SRO, he has to go through an 18-week police academy. Now, the Code of Virginia allows the school board to employ armed school security officers. Now, to go back to what Chairman Bulova says, we don't have a safety expert in Wood County Schools. They don't want anything to do with armed security. They don't want to have to qualify them, take care of the records, keep them, all that. We have a constitutional officer, the sheriff, who says, I don't want to put my name on these, I don't want to assume responsibility for somebody that's carrying a gun that's not under my control, which is understandable. You talked about a big pot of money, and it's up to the locales. If you guys can help us out on the Code of Virginia work, we've come up with a solution that addresses our problem in Wythe County. But because of the Code of Virginia and DCJS, we're stuck. So basically, we're employing these people for a year because under the code, you can before they're certified. But after this school year, if nothing changes, and then we don't have the luxury that Prince William has. I know I talked to the chairman of the school back last year when we were addressing this, and it absolutely boggled my mind how many people Prince William has retired. More than we have in law enforcement in Wythe County, which is a great thing to do. So that's one thing I hope the select committee would look at. And it's not that we're trying to skirt training. These are well-trained, experienced people, but just because of the wording.
The select committee has looked at not only the VRS issue, but it's also looking at other sections of the code related to flexibility for SROs. In other words, as you all know, most sheriff's departments or police departments want them to be an employee of that agency. But a lot of localities and school systems are funding the SROs partly out of the school budget. I know a couple of localities that I represent is doing that to get additional. So we're trying to figure out ways to allow that from a flexibility standpoint. But in addition to that, we're looking at legislation to directly look at the issue that you have addressed for school security officers. And trying to see what we can do related to training. Now, DCJS, as you know, has pretty strict standards for SROs, but we're looking at the school security officers and what training they may need to have, and then looking at the period of time that they can accomplish that. So it gives you some flexibility. And then also looking at the fact that most cases, the closest place that you could get the training would be with the local law enforcement agency and working with them. But you've got to have a sheriff or a chief that's willing to really do that. So we're looking at that and trying to address that as well.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Fitzgerald Ball, Louisiana County. We made a decision this year to fund 5 elementary school SROs. And I have been a school administrator, and the thing that always gets me, though, put these committees together, I've seen that, and I've been calling this a false sense of security, because when we first started the safety committee, I told the board member before we started, I said, I bet you not one recommendation would be for detectives, metal detectives. And metal detective was not on that list. And I bet you most localities will not include metal detectives on that list, because parents don't like, community don't like what it brings, what it things bring. But how can you effectively say that you have a safe school without metal detectors? And believe it or not, may not we want them or not, there's no way to really say you can, and I know there's always loopholes and things like that, but without metal detectors, how can you honestly say that you got that school secure? Because kids got backpacks that still bring in school, things of that nature, but nobody will come up with metal detectors because it does not look good, and we don't want to make parents mad.
Well, you're exactly right, and none of the recommendations we have, related or surrounding metal detectors. But it's also because we all represent the parents, And you're elected by the same parents that elect or re-elect me, and at this point, they're not willing to go that route. Now, other states have done that, and one of the things we did look at is other states. I will tell you, metal detectors and magnetometers and those kinds of things are fairly expensive. So we think actually the recommendations we've come up with are probably more cost effective, but also deal with keeping what has unfortunately been the trend where you have outside individuals coming into the school and looking at that. Now for students, again, I'm going to come back to where I started. We still think that behavioral health and getting the kids help early and preventing the bullying or preventing where they become suicidal or they come back to school and say, I'm going to take out somebody because they made me mad. That's what we're trying to address. So we think our dollars, if we can put the dollars in that, we're all better served.
I agree with you on the behavioral health. It's got to be caught, and there has to be some changes probably in what's allowed in some of the family, because if you're allowing a child to stay with a family where there's criminal stuff going on, what do you expect the end product's going to be at school? But I also wanted to, what he mentioned on the metal detector, and when you talked about your MOU, we wonder why we look around and we say the kids today don't want to work or we don't want to. And I tend to believe we mama and daddy it to death. And that's our, and I'll give you an example. We do have SROs, and there has to be a close relationship with law enforcement and the educators on this. Because I sat there and listened to a sheriff saying we had a dog alert on a car, then the principal intervened and said, you're not checking that car. Now, whose responsibility is it at that point? And what it makes me want to say, and I don't go down on record, it makes me say, why are we spending a dime on security if you're not going to let them do the job that they're there for? Because the drug dealer is not going to pick the person that looks like a druggie to sell drugs in our schools. So we gotta follow up on any leads, and we gotta allow them to do their job. And I hope the MOU worked out favorably for both, because there has to be a close relationship there.
The one thing we learned, and probably with the negotiation, the extensive negotiations sound like the Fairfax one with its MOU, one of the things that I think a lot of folks don't realize is that school resource officers are supposed to look for criminal offenses.
Wow.
But there has to be support at the top of the school administration and the principal and assistant principals and staff to realize the difference. And school safety officers can deal with disciplinary issues or the like. But school resource officers are not supposed to deal with disciplinary issues, but once they are invited in the school, or if other law enforcement agency personnel are invited in the school and they do a search, if they've got probable cause and they're supposed to do their duty and actually charge or whatever. Now, if a school system's not allowing them to do that, that's another issue.
And I spent 30 years in the Air Force, and it's all about risk management in today's world, the terrorist activity and everything else. You got to assess the risk and what you can afford to pay for it. We are doing it in the courthouses, we're doing it in the General Assembly. We're checking everything coming through the door.
Yeah.
And one member here mentioned it's a huge soft target in school.
Yeah.
All right, I saw two other hands over here. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm Frank from Mecklenburg County, and we have this 7 schools, and when you see on the social media something happen, soon become old news, then we forget about it. You have security officers in 5 or 7 schools, go back to Bohmke and Stafford. So with our administration from the federal level have not come down with any guidelines, how does that affect Virginia? Whether you all have committees, how does that affect you and power since the federal government have not chosen to come out with some type of guidelines or regulations that will help this issue of school safety?
Well, I think for a number of us that have served any time in the General Assembly, for issues that we think impact Virginians, we don't wait on the federal government, because if we waited on the federal government, we'd all be waiting a long time. Now, on the other hand, we have to be cognizant of the fact, as you all are at the local level, that if the federal government says you can't do something, obviously, or there's a court case or whatever, we're cognizant of that. But we have just gone ahead with a lot of these recommendations, partnering really with the localities that have taken the lead on this in many cases. And really, again, this is as much a partnership between the state and the local governments as any other issue, and probably even more important that that be the case, because school funding and school issues are supposed to be a partnership with the local and the state. So the federal government really hasn't, I don't think, impacted us for good or bad in this way. And again, I think the reason for the creation of the select committee is we just felt like we needed to go ahead and start working on this from a state standpoint, update the work that had already been done, but really gather, looking at what other states have done and our localities that had really addressed this, and come up with those things that we think would help all localities.
Yes, sir.
All right, one thing, one real quick. We have 10 professional development days each year that teachers are required to attend. We have a great relationship with our sheriff in Fluvanna. He has deputies at the schools every time the kids are loading and unloading the bus, which is, we all know that's the most dangerous time. You got 500 kids all of a sudden getting off the bus, they're standing outside, they got to come through one entrance. Okay? My question is this: is there any way y'all can get together with the state police, come up with some type of training? Because some of these folks are like I am. We're out in the country. You talk Fitzgerald talked about soft targets. We are definitely a soft target, because best case scenario, it's going to be 10 minutes before our resource officer gets any help. Is there any way y'all can come up with some type of program to go to the schools to train any teacher that would volunteer to do it? I'm not saying to arm us, okay? But possibly teach us to use tasers, teach us somehow to tactically support that SRO, because for 10 minutes that SRO is by themselves. If a child is going to come into our school and do a mass shooting, the first place that they're probably going to start is to walk up behind the SRO and shoot them. And now we're 10 minutes by ourselves, best case scenario, and we're going to teach our kids to hide. But come in there and teach us how to help in that situation, to support the SRO, to support any other sheriff department employee before they get there.
One of the things that you're going to see us look at from a funding standpoint is the department, criminal justice services, and the office within for school safety within that, to do exactly that, to provide additional training for teachers. As you know, we require now that every school, at least I believe it's twice during the year, do a school shooter drill. But you're exactly right. There are a lot of other situational types of things that people need to be aware of. I like your idea of trying to pull in the state police. They've really not taken a responsibility for that, but that may be something we could talk to the superintendent about and see, in addition to their other duties, really work with the local law enforcement providing that assistance. Because I can tell you, a law enforcement, and we've got a retired one here apparently, local law enforcement folks and the state police, they know better than anyway how to address that and to have teachers. And we are looking at some additional training requirements for teachers, but again, we want to be careful with that and make sure it's effective and cost effective at the same time, and not just something that they check off the box and say, I've gone to this. It needs to be effective, and it needs to be something that's worthwhile. So we're working on that too.
Okay, we have about 5 more minutes. I see 2 more hands. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Terry Keller from Clark County. I was curious, as you're talking about all of these different things, in particular, there was the grant for the school resource officer. Out of these different things that you're looking at, is there any permanent funding available for counties, or is it all just a piece here and there of part-time help?
That's something else we're discussing is again, when I talked about the mental health professionals, we talked about the school counselors, that's going to impact the SOQs to a certain extent. So we're looking at that $250 per student. that would be obviously a cost, that would be an ongoing cost. So we are looking at those. We haven't gotten the budget figures for those yet. School resource officers, it's always been a grant program. I think some of these other things are going to be a grant program. The problem with school resource officers, not a problem, but they're not state employees. They're local government employees. They could be part of the compensation board, or it could be part of the local law enforcement. That's why we've done grant programs, because we can provide the funding. And actually, we've had funding ongoing. We're looking at increasing that. But that's the rub with school resource officers and school security officers. They're technically local employees.
So possibly the state would help fund these school counselors, is that what I'm hearing?
Well, what we would do is make sure, first of all, that they're actually counseling, which means we're going to have to come up with funds for like school test administrators or the like. So you're probably going to see some of that funding to move them into a more school counsel role, a traditional role. And then we're going to look at mental health professionals. There is a lot of school systems have mental health professionals in their schools or per 3 schools, so we're looking at that too. Those would be the ones I would see being included as part of the SOQ.
Yes.
That's
Sir
me.
in the back.
Just a couple of things. Name's Todd King from Montgomery County. And the grants that you're talking about, is there some way we could work into that? Is like us, we voted here a few months ago to add another SRO officer to a school. But then we file for a grant or something, no, you already got that. Is there something that you could put in place that said, well, you've done this, so we give you an X amount so you can move your safety up a few steps or something?
I'll have to look at that. Generally what we've done is try to use the grant funds to get systems up that don't have any. So in other words, add more. What a lot of school systems, and we try to be, again, flexible with that, because some school systems, they may have like 3 pod schools, and the person is housed at the high school, but they're close to the middle and the elementary school. So again, from a response time standpoint, again, in rural areas, looking at where you've got outlying schools, like you mentioned, and seeing if you can fund those, and then the ones that are closer. So response time, all those kinds of things, I think needs to come into it. But again, what we've tried to do is just provide more money to get more schools that don't have school resource officers. But I'd have to go back and look at that.
And one more thing we discussed in Montgomery County was local police and state police, you know, if they do their paperwork, maybe they can park in a school parking lot, you know, and do their work there. At least somebody, if something was going to happen, they would see the car there. And it would deter somebody from.
Well, I think that's definitely something. Unfortunately, our state police area headquarters are understaffed too at this point. That's another concern a number of us that support the state police have. But that is something, that's another good idea. And again, we I don't think have really reached out to the superintendent. And I know Brian Moran, our Secretary of Public Safety, and I have talked about there needs to be more collaboration from the state's public safety officials and local school and local government law enforcement folks to really look at things like that we could do. I don't know if you've ridden with state troopers, but they have computers in their cars now, so they can do their paperwork wherever they want to.
Okay, on fifth, I have one more right here.
My final question, Delegate, it's to you, unfortunately. The School Resource Safety Officer Grant, I mean, it's a wonderful program, but the problem is there's no benefits. You know, and it was very tough for us to hire a school safety officer and tell them this is a one-shot deal and I can offer you nothing but money, you know, to hourly money, you know. How can you help that, you know, because a lot of people would not have benefits and it's tough.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, and our recommendations do not address, you know, that would be a potentially an SOQ issue too. And again, just from my standpoint, school counselors, mental health professionals, I think they are a higher priority, and see if we can get the funding there. I think that's something we can look at when we look at SOQ funding. But again, what we've heard, again, from most school systems is they, first and foremost, want us to beef up the school resource officer program, and then look at school safety officers as another kind of tier or priority. So again, that's part of our 60 recommendations, but I think that's going to be a little bit farther down the list.
I'm going to go ahead and give one more thing. 46 years of law enforcement, I've been police chief. Nothing's going to be perfect that you do. It's not going to stop at all. Mental health is where you need
Yeah.
it.
So, I know we've run a little tiny bit over, but this is such an important topic. My colleague, Jack Cavalier, would you like to address the issue? It's kind of in concert with...
Sure. And this is an ask for the rest of you as my colleagues, and I'm glad my colleague from Prince William as well as Wood County talked to the issue of the retirees and
Jack,
the
you might
training.
want to come up here, do you mind?
Yeah, I was just saying, the gentleman from Wood County as well as Prince William County brought up these issues regarding retired officers and the constraints that we have right now with them and the training requirements. Now, what we in Stafford County did after the Parkland tragedy was our sheriff created a task force and met with the school officials and came up with a unique kind of hybrid approach to this. And instead of, we have school resource officers in every middle school and high school in Stafford County, and we're far smaller than Fairfax County, and I applaud you, Ms. Bulova, for everything you've done, as well as you, Delegate Landis. But we wanted to put them in elementary schools, because no matter how big you are or how small you are, the possibility of a shooting exists now. So we started a pilot program, and we don't call them school resource officers, but they're called school protection officers per the sheriff, and he controls them, and they're his employees. And what he is targeting is recently retired, yet still fully trained law enforcement professionals, which we have a lot up in our area because we're in the Washington, D.C. metro area. So we got everybody from ex-FBI to military to across the board. So those people would therefore also be cheaper to pay because we're paying them basically as a temporary employee. They don't need the benefits generally. So all you're doing is paying them as a part-time employee, not full year, just part of the year during the school term. So they would be fully trained, they would be armed, and they would basically provide an insurance policy to the schools, particularly elementary schools, because a new sheriff's deputy doesn't want to spend a lot of time, just fooling around with little kids. But some of the older, more mature guys who've been around the block, they're happy doing this, and we found that they want to. And women, yes, yes, ma'am, as evidenced by the two chairmen up here. But so we have put in our legislative priorities an ask for the General Assembly to allow for this to happen and the DCGS rules being relaxed for this one certain circumstance only to allow them to work the part-time school year for this purpose only. And I think that will help a lot of us save our schools, protect our schools, and save us a little bit more money too, as not have a full-time guy or girl. Thank you.
How will you know if that happens or if that's approved?
It's already been submitted as legislation.
Yeah, that's more a question for Delegate Landis.
Who's got the bill? Bob Thomas.
Bob Thomas from
Senator Stewart.
Senator Richard Stewart are spearheading it from our end. But if you contact your General Assembly members and mention this to them, we'd like to get everybody on board with this so we can all benefit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jack. If you'd like to talk to Jack more about that, he'll probably be hanging around for a minute. And how about a great round of applause for Chairman Bulova and Delegate Landis.